Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia, and I'm an intern with the Office of Student Engagement. Welcome to one of our summer resource workshops. This one will be on counseling and psychological services, and our presenter today is Caroline Black. Take it away, Ms. Black.
Thank you, Olivia. And Olivia, you are going to be moderating the chat. And so do you want to just and you can feel free to just interrupt me if people have questions in the chat. Olivia, you can just pop in and read them out loud. That's totally fine. And also if people can use the chat, you can jump in on audio, on video, whatever you would like to do. But thanks so much for letting me join you tonight. Like Olivia said, my name is Caroline Black. I'm a mental health clinician with counseling and psychological services here at Seton Hall. We also, otherwise known as CAPS, that's our acronym. And I'm also the outreach and prevention coordinator. And so I am just excited to connect and tell you a little bit more about our services. And so the agenda for tonight is going through our services, and I'll kind of break it down into from the first contact through all the potential recommendations and ways in which we offer resources to students. So I'll really go through that in a lot of detail. And then we'll talk a little bit more for the second half of the presentation on how to support mental health in college. And so I know Olivia mentioned that some people are going to be first-year students, some people might be transfer students, so some people may or may not have had experience in college yet. But we'll talk about some ways to start practicing strategies now that can help for the long run. And then obviously we'll leave a little time for questions. But again, I'm totally open for people to ask them as you go. And then if, we save them to the end, or it makes sense to answer them as we go, then we'll do that. Right. So whenever we at CAPS talk to the Seton Hall community about mental health, we like to talk about it in the context of this continuum. And the way that we put it is, just like we all have physical health, we all have mental health. And just like our physical health, it throughout our lives goes on this spectrum from healthy to struggling, right? At any point in our lives, our physical health is going to wax and wane, right? And the same is true for our mental health. And so the idea is that we want to start to get a sense of self-awareness of what our signs and signals are personally in our thoughts, in our emotions, and our behaviors, when we want to know what that looks like when our mental health is healthy, and we want to know what it looks like when our mental health is starting to get compromised. And so I won't go through everything on here, but I'll go through kind of each of the different colors, right? And so when our mental health is healthy, it doesn't mean that we don't have any stress, right? I don't think there's one college student out there who has no stress. So it doesn't mean that that's completely out of our lives. It just means that we're managing it in a way that we don't necessarily feel like we need to actively use any self-care. We're able to just sort of manage it automatically. And so healthy mental health looks like normal fluctuations in mood, right? Most people are grumpy at night or when they first wake up, right? Or most people are stressed and anxious before they take a test. And then usually that goes down, right? Having normal sleep patterns, being able to get about the same number of hours of sleep every night, trying to stay on a schedule as much as you can. Feeling physically well and full of energy, being able to perform consistently academically, right? So you're going to class, you're turning in assignments, right? All of that. And being socially active. You're connected, you've got a social group either here on campus or friends from home, right? But you're participating. And so again, if you're in that range, it's basically probably just keep doing what you're doing, right? Because you're managing it. When we start to get into the yellow is when we see that maybe those stressors are starting to either go on for too long, or they're becoming more intense, right? And so our kind of natural response maybe needs to get kicked up a notch, right? And so that's when we might start to see some nervousness, irritability, sadness, kind of those lingering moods and emotions, maybe some trouble sleeping, like nightmares or difficulty staying asleep, tired and low energy, having physical complaints like muscle tension or headaches or migraines, procrastination. So some of that maybe is starting to show up in your academics, like maybe missing some class, and then decreased social activity, right? Maybe pulling back from that. And so if any of that's going on, that's a signal to us that we want to turn up our self-care practices, right? We want to really consciously set aside some time to practice that because we're getting really taxed. So we're going to talk a lot more later about how to set up some of those self-care practices and what that can look like. So in the orange here, impacted, again, right? Like we just keep thinking about duration, intensity, and how much of a disruption all of these things in life are causing us. And so if somebody is feeling anger, anxiety, pervasive sadness, and hopelessness, right? That's been persisting. They're having restless and disturbed sleep. They have fatigue, aches, and pains. They have decreased performance. They're really not going to class. They're really not turning things in, right? Social avoidance or withdrawal. That's the sign when we're in the orange. That's usually the time when we want to reach out for help, right? We want to reach out for support because you're probably doing all of the self-care stuff, and the things that are going on might just be more overwhelming, right? You might need some support and getting some more tools to put in your toolbox. So when we are seeing things going on in that impacted section, that's usually when we say, hey, like that might be a good time to call CAPS, or that would definitely be a good time to go to the website if you haven't already and check out some of the resources there. And then in the red here in struggling, that's, again, if we go back to a medical analogy, just like someone who has a head injury needs to go and be seen at the hospital, right? That is the analogy for someone who's struggling with their mental health, right? It is something that's so intense, right? It's the anxiety and depressive mood is so excessive. The sleep is so disturbed. The exhaustion and physical illness is just so draining. People can't get out of bed or can't go to class, right? Haven't shown up, or turned in anything. And they're completely pulled back from their social life, right? That's the time that we're saying like, hey, like you should talk to someone now. You should talk to someone today, right? And especially if someone in that struggling zone expresses any self-harm or any thoughts of suicide or killing themselves, that is the time when we say, yep, absolutely, you got to talk to someone right now. And so let's walk over to CAPS or let's call CAPS right now. And again, I'm going to talk a lot more about what that looks like and how you can get supports that way. Okay. And so if looking at this continuum got you thinking about like, oh, like I wonder, where I'm at or what some of the things I may be experiencing might be, we have online screenings on our website that are completely anonymous. And they can provide a self-assessment for you to start to think through like, like what has been coming up for me? And are there some recommendations for things that I might do? So we always like to let people know that that's available. And again, totally private, totally anonymous, and you can do it anytime. There's no, follow-up required. You could do it and then decide to do nothing with it, but that's always an option. Okay. So now I'm going to talk more about what CAP services are offered and what you can expect when you get connected with us. Here's our little tree. So we see, right, we kind of break down a connection with CAPS into 3 stages, right? So the first one is you got to connect with us, right? So either calling or dropping in, making that initial contact. And that can look like a couple of different things. That could look like making an appointment for initial assessment. That could look like calling because you're in a crisis or you need an emergency help. That could look like calling because you've got a question and you're like not quite sure if this is an issue or you're not quite sure if you should be worried about a friend, but you want some consultation, right? Those are all options and all things that you can drop in or call us about. And then recommendations, right? These are what we're looking at. They could certainly happen from consultation and crisis help, but especially if someone comes in for an appointment, then we're looking at like, okay, what recommendations might come out of that meeting? So we're going to go through each of these. And just as a side note, outside of counseling services, CAPS also offers outreach, right? So that's what I'm doing here right now, talking to the Seton Hall community about mental health, about CAPS services. And so that's something too, if like you get involved with a club and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to, maybe CAPS can come in and talk with us about something, like that's something that we do with clubs on campus, with Greek life. You'll probably see us at like the student fair in the fall, right? All of that stuff. And then the mental health screenings, which I mentioned. All right. So to connect with us, you can drop in person at our office, or you can give us a call. And because our services are totally voluntary, we can't have anybody making an appointment for someone else, even their parents. So just like any other clinician in the community, right? Like it's completely up to you about whether or not you would like to pursue counseling services. And so no one can make that decision for you. And so that's why we have to have the person who wants to come in make the appointment themselves. And then we also can't do appointments via email. We've got to have you call or drop in. All right. So our hours and location. So we are on the South Orange campus. We are right off of the green in Mooney Hall on the second floor. And our main office is room 27. We're open during the school year, Monday through Friday, 8:45 to 4:45. However, those crisis services that I mentioned are available 24/7. So as I said, we'll respond. There's always a mental health clinician who responds, who will answer you can get in touch with on our phone number, and also through the 24/7 Seton Hall Mental Health Crisis Hotline. So if you're in a crisis and it's during these times, you can always drop into our office, or you can give us a call. If it's after hours, since our office will be closed, you can all just call us, right? So you can call our number, and then you can also call this hotline number. And then after hours, again, even over vacations, even over winter break, on Christmas, on New Year's, right? That will be answered. Okay. So at that initial contact, right, what it's going to look like is if you call, you're saying, hey, I need to talk to someone right now, right? This is what it's going to look like. And if you call and you set up an appointment for initial assessment, this is essentially what it's going to look like. So what that is going to focus on is the counselor who you're talking with is going to want to speak individually with you to talk about your concerns. They're going to want to ask a variety of questions just to better understand what the concern is and who you are. And then they want to provide you with their recommendation for the best course of action and the next steps to take. All right. So again, here we've got the common recommendations, right, that usually come out of that initial assessment. And so the first one I'll talk about is self-help, which we'll also be talking a lot in more detail later. But this, I would say, is like if someone, calls or comes in and they're like in the green to yellow area of that continuum, that would be a recommendation, right? Would be like, hey, like, how about we try this? How about we'll come up with a plan for the self-help resources that you're going to try and practice, and we're going to see if that helps. And if it doesn't, you can always come back, right? But let's try this first. And again, we have a ton of resources on the site. You would go to the Seton Hall website. You can type in CAPS or Counseling and Psychological Services and get to our page. And then under resources, we have this whole self-help section. And so I did a screenshot, but it keeps going. So you can keep scrolling down, and there's a lot of different types of self-help practices on there. All right. Another recommendation can be group counseling. So I'll talk about what that looks like at CAPS. So sometimes people say to me, like, they think, oh, like, I feel like group counseling is like not as good as individual, or it makes me feel weird, like I don't know that I would want to do that or like talk to peers about it. And to that, I would say, right, you're right. It is totally different from individual counseling because the way that it works is different. It works by virtue of being a group. And so, right, like if students are interested in it and they want to do group, they often find it helpful because they have support from peers, right? That is the thing that benefits, right? Like that's the thing that helps is not necessarily talking to just one person, but getting a what buy-in and just like that connection and empathizing from your peers. And so I would also say, right, like if you're like, that's not my cup of tea, then that's totally fine. But I wouldn't say it's lesser than, it's different, right? It's a different way of doing counseling. And so some groups that we offer are a little more like workshop and more structured, right? Like it's like kind of focused on skills, not a lot of self-disclosure, not a lot of talking about your experiences. It's really just about, let's learn these different skills for this issue, right? And then other groups are really process focused. They are about giving each other support and sharing and talking with each other. And so our stress and anxiety management workshops and our managing moods workshops are the ones that are really skills focused, right? It would come in, it's almost like a class. You're there, it's only 4 sessions, and then, you can practice all those skills, you can come back and do it again. And then these process groups go on for a lot longer, that you build a group, you work together throughout the semester, throughout the year, and we offer these support groups based on student interest. So if a student is saying, we've got a couple of students who are like, yeah, I think I would be really interested in coming to the Women of Color support group, right? Then we can start to say, like, all right, let's get this up and running. So it really depends on how many students we have interested. So that's something too that you can always call us about. You could say like, hey, like, I heard that you might have some of these groups going on. Are any of them running? I just want to let you know I'm interested if you ever run it. The other thing that's nice about group is that students can attend in a limited number of sessions. So kind of like I said, even with the ones like stress and anxiety that are only 4 sessions, you could do that as many times as you want. You could do it throughout the school year, every year, if you wanted to, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there. That's really nice. All right. And so another recommendation could be individual counseling. And so this is something that I think people might be more familiar with, but if not, basically individual counseling is when you sit one-on-one with a counselor and you just talk about a particular issue. And so it can address a wide variety of concerns, from stress to relationship difficulties, loss, trauma, issues with family, anxiety, and depression. And at CAPS, because we serve the entire Seton Hall student community, which includes undergrad, graduate students, seminary students, right? We have a short-term model so that we can make sure that we can make time for anyone who wants to come in and is appropriate for individual therapy. And so that's why we have the short-term focus. There's no limit on the number of sessions. However, we are making a treatment plan that's focused on like, okay, we're going to meet every other week and we're going to see if we can work on this anxiety and, see where we're at the end of 2 months or at the end of the semester, right? That's what the focus is going to look like. And it is very common, especially in the school year and the swing of things, for people to be seen every other week. And sometimes people come once a month, right? Or they might come a couple of times a semester, depending on the concern and what they're looking for. The other thing that we want to make sure people know is that individual counseling services, just like all other CAPS services, are free. So you're not paying anything additional. The cost of counseling is covered in your tuition. So there's no additional charge. The only caveat is that, and I'll say a little more about this, but if anyone who's an individual counseling client would like to pursue medication management, we do have that as an option for individual counseling clients. And you would not pay for those appointments, but if you get a medication filled at your pharmacy, you pay for it there. And then confidentiality. So individual counseling, all of the counselors at CAPS are confidential resources at the university. And so what that means is that no counselor is ethically, right, bound by our license and ethics. We cannot disclose anything that you say to us unless, one, you give us permission to do that in written signed consent saying, I give you permission to speak with my parents. I give you permission to speak with this office at the university, right? So if you don't give us that, we can't say anything about it, right? We cannot tell anybody, even your parents, about whether or not you're a client. We can't confirm or deny that, right? We have to have that consent. The only other circumstances in which confidentiality could be breached are in situations of imminent threat of harm. So if someone is an imminent risk of hurting themselves or others, or killing themselves or others, or if a vulnerable population is at imminent risk of being abused, so that includes minors, elderly or older adults, and people with disabilities. So if imminent risk to self, others, or abuse, imminent abuse is disclosed, that is the only circumstance in which confidentiality can be breached. And again, even in those cases, counselors, because of our ethics codes, we work with the client. We want to be able to work with each other so that we don't have to break confidentiality against that person's wishes. However, those are the circumstances where ethically that the safety would outweigh the confidentiality. And so I kind of go into detail about that a lot, but sometimes people have a lot of questions about it, or they get really concerned, like my parents are going to get told, or it's going to interfere with my academics, right? CAPS is a completely separate entity from academics. So it's a health record. It does not go on your GPA, on your transcript, anything like that. It is kept completely separate from your academics. It will only interact if you want it to, right? If you say, I would like for you to speak with the dean of students, right? I will sign a consent for that, right? And it goes both ways. It's a double-edged sword. So CAPS can't negatively interact with your academics, and it also really can't positively interact with it either, right? We can't excuse people from classes. We can't excuse people from assignments, right? We really are separated from academics. Right. And so the last service and recommendation that I'd like to talk about are off-campus referrals. And so sometimes people say, oh, like I'm coming in, CAPS is free. Why would I go off campus for therapy, right? Like, why would I do counseling anywhere else? And that's a great question. And the reason why that happens is because we know as clinicians, right, when someone's coming in, our responsibility is to, based on our assessment, give you the best recommendation that we can. So if we know that we can in good faith recommend that we be your resource, we're going to make a referral to someone who we know would be able to help you best, right? And so sometimes that could be because the student needs to feel comfortable with their counselor, right? That CAPS maybe doesn't have, like, for example, right now on staff, we don't have a clinician who is a man right now. And so if someone was like, I really want to work with an individual therapist who's a man, I feel like I totally get that. We can't provide that. So let me help you find someone. Another reason why we might make a referral is because we know that someone else has expertise that we don't have, right? So if someone's coming in for a particular issue and we know that we are not able to effectively treat it, we're going to make a referral. So when that happens, it's not something where, we say, I think you should go see someone else. Bye, right? What we'll do is work with you to figure out, okay, what are the characteristics you're looking for? What's your insurance, right? We work with people to provide you a list of different people to connect with to see if, they're seeing new clients, all of that stuff. And we have a new case manager who's joining us this year who's really going to be taking on all the referral work. So she's going to be the point person who can help you find someone who's in your insurance or who would be close enough or who does telehealth, right? She'll be the go-to person for that. Another reason why a referral might be made is that the frequency and the intensity of the therapy that the person is looking for, that the person needs, isn't available at CAPS, right? So like I said, since we're short term, we really don't often have that flexibility to see people more frequently than every other week. And if someone's like, I really want to work with someone long term, once a week, then we could say, that's great. And let's help you find that. So those are all sorts of reasons why people might come to CAPS, do an assessment, and then the result is we're going to look for someone off campus. right. So maybe before I jump into this, I just want to check in and see if there are any questions about those CAP services. All right. Not seeing anything yet, so I'll go ahead and get started, but if we need to double back, we will. Right. So the reason why it's so important to talk about supporting mental health in college is because we know from research that college students represent a population that is really at risk for some of that impacted and struggling mental health, like on that continuum. So the American College Health Association, that's ACHA here, they collect data every single year from undergrads and graduate students. And in 2022, they surveyed 23,000 undergraduate students across, I think it was 36 campuses. So a pretty large survey. And what they found is that almost half of those students reported a moderate level of stress. So they were in that impacted range. They found that a third reported high levels of stress. So maybe getting more into that impacted range. What did I say here? Reacting. Impacted range. And then again, another about 50% reported feeling really lonely. And then of that group, about a quarter reported suicidal ideation. And so again, like starting to move into that struggling territory. And we also know from the research that suicide is the second leading cause of death in college students after accidents. And so what that means is that we really want to use this time as an opportunity to set some self-care practices in place that we can keep up, not just in college, but then after college too. But we especially want to make sure that we've got that going now. And so again, just as I mentioned a minute ago, right, we want to keep in mind, my mental health could fluctuate and I would say it's really normal for one person to fluctuate given what's going on in their life, what's going on for them internally, right? Throughout this continuum. And so we want to just get to know ourselves better and get to know ways that work for us to help take care of ourselves. So don't worry, this QR code is coming back. I don't know if you were worried, but this will take you to the self-help resources on the CAPS website. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you some ideas of different types of self-care. And then we're going to talk about some of the resources we have on the website that could match up with that. So if you want to go ahead and go to this, you can, but don't worry, we'll have it at the end as well. So self-care, I think sometimes it gets a little cliched. I don't know if it feels that way to people, but sometimes I think like we have this idea of like, I'm going to massage envy every week, right? Or I'm treating myself. And one other way to think about it, not that those things are bad, but another way to think about it is that we can break down self-care into a lot of different domains. And so one of those domains is psychological self-care. So that's really being mindful of the fact that the things we think to ourselves, negative or positive, have a big effect on our mental health. And we want to do things that help support a healthy mindset. And so here we have a lot of different ideas for things that can do that, how to be in a practice of supporting a healthy mindset. So if you want, just take a minute to read through this list to yourself and just note, are there things that I'm doing now? Are there things that I'd like to do? And maybe just like jot it down for yourself. I know one of them says take a break from screen time, but maybe just note it on your phone, right? And so one way, let's say you wanted to read something that is unrelated to academic work. Great. So part of the CAPS partnership with the library is that we have a collection of self-help resources and books that are geared to promoting mental health and wellness in our community. And the self-help resources, what's cool is that it's not just in the Walsh Library on the South Orange campus, it's also in the IHS Library in Nutley and the CAPS office here at Mooney Hall. And so that collection is designed to help you educate a bit more about different mental health concerns, and then and also just topics that are really relevant to students, like making that transition to college, like becoming more independent as a young adult, working on relationships, things like that. And then we also have topics revolving around specific issues like perfectionism, insomnia, chronic pain, mental health in the context of race, body image issues, exploring and accepting gender and sexuality, things like that. And so if you want to check that out, again, you can borrow one from CAPS. You can go to one of the libraries and just look for them there. And one way to do that is you can go to the university library catalog and then just search in quotes CAPS resources, and that will pull up all of the different books that you can check out. All right. So another domain of self-care is emotional self-care. And so, as we might imagine, right, that's about acknowledging and managing our emotions. We all have emotions. They're information, right? Before humans could even speak in languages, we had emotions. And so if we start to tune into them and really become aware, we can start to practice how to respond to them in ways that take care of ourselves. So similar to last time, maybe just look through these, scan through, see if there are any that you do, see if there are any that you'd like to do. And so again, an example could be, right, if you're working on acknowledging your emotions and allowing yourself to feel them fully, one way to do that could be going to the What's Up Doc section of our website. And so that's the name of a video series that CAPS has created. And it's like a Q&A type of video, usually like 5 minutes, but on specific topics related to mental health and wellness. And some of those topics are about relationships, about grief and loss, managing academic distress, and more. And so it would look like this. You can just go to that section of our website and you can watch it directly from there. So physical self-care, maybe this is the one that kind of like people are more practiced with, more in touch with. And so again, we want to take care of the physical self to help support our mental wellness. And so if you look through this list, I'm sure there are some things that you're doing, and I'm sure there's some things that you'd like to do. So maybe taking a look there. But our example could be, let's say you want to do various stress relief techniques like meditation. We have some guided meditations that were recorded by a CAPS counselor, and they're on these different topics of loving kindness, gratitude, and leaves on a stream. And so all of these can help you focus on not just being mindful of your thoughts and your feelings, but also practicing mindfulness, which is a well-researched method for improving our focus, for decreasing stress, for getting better sleep, for managing pain, and for lowering our blood pressure. That's hard to say. So what's really cool is that these practices are going to have an impact on your physical health. So if you're like a athlete, or even if you're not an athlete and you got an injury, right? You're like, oh, I can't like do my run. I can't go do my workout. These meditations actually, even though you're not going anywhere, they're working on your physical health too. Another domain is spiritual self-care. And so we can look at that. It could be a religious practice. And then we could also look at it as simply connecting with who you are and who you want to be deep down. So if you note for yourself any of these that you do want to do, one option can be if you want to make time for reflection. We have a wellness room in the Walsh Library on the 4th floor. And the purpose of it is a private space that's designed just to improve mental health and well-being. So it's not a study space, it's just a space to offer a time to calm, to unplug, practice mindfulness. There's like coloring pages in there, lots of different activities. But the idea is just to take a minute for yourself, step away from your work, and just check in, reflect, practice anything that feels helpful to you in that moment to feel connected to your spiritual self. And finally, we've got social self-care, right? So investing in your relationships and creating them and maintaining them. We are social creatures, right? We need other people. And so maybe looking through, especially as you're transitioning to a new community, this one might be something that needs some extra support, right? Because it's a big transition. Making time to see friends or talk to friends and family, making time to put yourself out there to go to different events. And so one way through the CAP self-help that you could work on social self-care is expanding your social circle through Together All. And so Together All is another resource. It's anonymous, online, totally free to Seton Hall students. And it's a mental health support platform that's anonymous, right? So it's a way of going on there and just chatting or looking at other people's, like you wouldn't even have to post anything. You could just read other people's descriptions of their experiences related to mental health. And it's a 24/7 community that's moderated by mental health clinicians. So that could be something to try. And I think next week is about in student engagement, different clubs, right? And so if that's something that you're thinking about, that next week could be a great time to start thinking, okay, what do I want to check out when I'm on campus? So I just want to highlight that all of those different domains of self-care I got from this resource called Cognito. And so that's also on the CAPS website. You can go to supporting our community and go to Cognito. If you are interested in trainings on how do I talk to my friends about mental health, if I'm concerned about them, how do I talk to friends about other things that are really traditionally tricky to talk about, like sexual assault, like substance use, things like that. Cognito has a lot of different simulations that you can practice with. But the reason why I highlighted it here is that in the at risk for students training, they have that whole inventory of self-care exercises. So if you wanted to go back and do that again, you could just go to Cognito, click on it, and then sign in through PirateNet. All right, so before we get to the end and any questions that you have, I've got 2 action steps for you. So again, totally up to you if you want to do it or not. But if you're thinking okay, what am I going to do with all this information? Then just break it down to these 2 steps. So again, we've got our self-help resources. If you hover there, it should take you to that page on our website. And so action step 1 is between now and when you get on campus and start the fall, pick one thing on the CAP self-help website to practice and do it between now and then. Practice it once a week. So that's action step 1. A little transition there. All right, and action step 2 is to take out your phone right now and put in the CAPS number and the Seton Hall Mental Health 24/7 hotline. So I'll give you a minute or 2 to plug that in. Maybe I'll just leave this one up and we can open the floor to any questions or anything that didn't really make sense or anything like that. Can parents, okay, I see a question. That's a great question. Can parents call the crisis hotline for their student? Yes, they absolutely can. Parents can also call CAPS to consult and say that you're concerned about your student. Again, confidentiality is always going to apply. So if that student is a client at CAPS, unless the student has signed a release for the parent, then the CAPS counselor is not going to be able to confirm or deny that the student is a client. However, they can still provide consultation based on the circumstances that the parent is talking about, right? And if the student isn't a client, then sometimes what we can do is we can say, we can't make anybody seek counseling if they don't want to. However, we can reach out to the student. We can say, here's our information, or even better yet, if it feels like it would be more effective, have the parent reach out and say, here's the CAPS number. Why don't you just check out their site? Why don't you think about giving them a call? Other questions? Olivia, anything that I missed or anything else that you had to share?
Well, I've never actually used CAPS before, but my friends who have do recommend it. And I think it's important to remember for both parents and students who are on this phone call that there's no shame in seeking mental health treatment, or even just like a quick consultation for one day or whatever. College is very stressful. So there's no shame in asking for help. So remember that.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. I appreciate that. And I love my job. I love working with students here. So I'm always happy to meet with people. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there are a ton of other questions, but Olivia, if anything comes up, you can always reach out to us. Let me think about the best way to do that. I think the best way to do that would just honestly be to be like, hey, like I went to the summer resource workshop. I realized I didn't have the question then, but I have it now, or I wanted to ask about something else, right? The other thing that I do like to let people know, since they're new students coming in, is that the best time to make an appointment, if you are thinking, I really want to establish myself with CAPS sooner than later, right? The best time to make that appointment would be in August. So maybe like mid-August, giving us a call and just saying like, hey, I'll be coming on campus. And our admin can help you figure out a time. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope the rest of you have a great rest of your summer.
Yeah. Have a good summer, everyone. And also this recording will be available on Seton Hall's YouTube page in like 2 or 3 days if you ever want to come back to it. But yeah, have a good night, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.